all, I'm Javeria Afzal, Adaptation Finance Advisor with USAID Pakistan Climate Finance Accelerator, and will be your host for the next 35 minutes to unpack inclusive climate investment. One of the central challenges we hear again and again is how do we frame and access climate finance that is inclusive? We all know that negative effects of climate change has a disproportionate impact on women, youth, indigenous people, persons with disabilities, and other marginalized and underrepresented groups. And thus, it's very important that benefits of climate investments flow to these groups along with others. Both public and private sector has a key role to play on climate investments so to sustain bold climate action and ambition. And to talk about this important issue, I have with me our guest speakers, Lisa Gans, Director of Inclusive Investment, USAID Climate Finance for Development Accelerator, and Ms. Zainab Naeem, Associate Research Fellow and Head of Ecological Sustainability and Circular Economy at Sustainable Development Policy Institute. Many thanks, Lisa and Zainab, for joining me today. Lisa, for our audience, will be great if you can elaborate how can climate financing mechanisms be made more inclusive and accessible to support women and marginalized groups in their climate adaptation efforts. Over to you, Lisa.
Hi, Javeria. Thanks so much for the welcome. I'm so happy to be here with everyone today. In answer to your question, I think there are three major approaches that can be really effective in making climate financing mechanisms more inclusive and accessible for women and marginalized groups in general. First, it starts with designing financial products that truly meet their needs. This means developing tailored financial instruments like microloans or flexible credit that account for unique circumstances of women in vulnerable communities. A great example of this is the Kenya Women Microfinance Bank. They provide small loans to women farmers, specifically for climate resilient agriculture. And what's smart here is that they structure repayment around agricultural cycles, so farmers can pay back after harvest, not on rigid monthly schedules that don't fit their income patterns. It's not just about the money as well. They partner with local NGOs to train women in climate smart ag techniques. That makes sure that these women have the skills to use the funds effectively. And this addresses both financial and practical barriers women face, giving them real opportunities to adapt to climate challenges. In terms of gender responsive design, it's important that we don't just aim to include women as beneficiaries, but that we also make them active drivers of climate initiatives. One model for this is the Green Climate Fund, which I know a lot of people are familiar with. They've set gender equity requirements for all funded projects. In Ethiopia, for instance, there's a GCF-backed Climate Smart Ag program that includes components specifically designed to boost women's participation as farmers and community leaders. So by embedding gender requirements, GCF ensures that inclusivity is a priority across all projects and not just in specialized women-focused initiatives. Another powerful example is Women's Livelihood Bond Series from Impact Investing Exchange. This bond directly channels capital to women-led climate projects in South and Southeast Asia. Like they fund women-led cooperatives in Cambodia to install solar-powered irrigation. So by directing funds to women-led initiatives and providing technical support, the bond empowers women to drive climate adaptation efforts in their own communities. And this turns them into central figures in local resilience and improves their social standing as well. The second major approach, I think, is building local capacity and ensuring transparency in how funds are used. So simply providing the capital isn't enough. We need systems that enable local communities to manage and benefit from the investments. In Rwanda, there's a Rwanda Green Fund that's a great example. They collect sex disaggregated data on recipients and impacts of their projects. And so they allow the fund to monitor who benefits from the climate finance and to adjust strategies to ensure inclusivity. They focus on projects that support sustainable ag, renewable energy, ecosystem restoration, with a strong emphasis on community involvement. They also provide technical support to local organizations and farmers, including training women specifically in climate smart ag practices like agroforestry. So this builds local capacity and creates accountability to both communities and the donors through the sex disaggregated data. The third approach, and maybe the most foundational, is creating an enabling environment through policy and governance. Inclusive climate finance needs strong policies that mandate and support gender equity. Costa Rica, for example, the government's national climate change strategy includes requirements for women's representation in climate decision-making bodies. So it's not just a suggestion, it's a policy, which means that women are guaranteed a voice in shaping climate action at the national level. Similarly, Mexico, their climate projects that receive government funding must address gender equity as part of their criteria. So this kind of policy framework makes inclusivity non-negotiable and creates systemic incentives for both local and international organizations to prioritize gender and inclusivity in their projects. Funds like GCF that require a gender action plan also help ensure that gender and inclusion become normalized as part of climate activities. So to sum up, I think if we focus on designing inclusive financial products, strengthening local capacity with transparency, and creating strong policy environments, we can make climate finance more accessible and effective for women and marginalized groups. It's about empowering these communities to lead in climate adaptation and not just including them as an afterthought or a box tick. Javeria?
Great. Many thanks, Lisa. And I think you have really set the tone for this chat. And I think you also talked about localized approaches, which I think is a very important point when it comes to countries like Pakistan. Zainab, if I turn to you, how do you navigate cultural norms around gender when promoting inclusive climate investment in countries like Pakistan, which is very vulnerable to climate change? Do you think cultural practices that you have seen in Pakistan help or hinder the process? So Zainab, if you can answer this, and then I'll turn to Lisa for her global perspective on this.
Thank you, Javeria, and thank you, Lisa. I believe you have shared very pertinent examples when it comes to the role of women in finance. But when we are talking about cultural norms, and throughout the world, we observe that women play a dual role. But in context of Pakistan, especially overall developing countries nexus, it is mostly embedded in the culture. Their dual roles are embedded in culture, and the inclination is towards culture, religion, and traditional approaches. However, in the rural communities, especially, women are working as their mothers, their housewives, they're looking after the house chores, and then they're also managing fields with their husbands. But what happens is that they do not get a say in decision making. They're not part of the Jirga system. Jirga system is usually the community decision making system that takes place in villages, in towns, within the farming community who are managing the farms, right? So women have no say in that. So that's why they are not empowered, although they are supporting their families in the farms as well, but they do not get that empowerment. When it comes to finance, so now Pakistan has introduced Easy Paisa. It's like a mobile wallet. You have branchless banking within your hand, within your mobile phone. But what happens is that that has made it easier for women in Pakistan. But what happens is that in communities, especially in northern areas, where women, due to their cultural norms, they have to stay in their houses and they're not even working in farms. That's where the issue arises. Although dynamics are shifting now, women are taking decision-making roles in the urban areas, even in some rural areas in rural Punjab and Sindh side. But I think it will take some time for throughout the country to change, to shift this overall tradition of women getting access to finance. At government level, there are mostly movement and mobilization is seen when policymakers are taking into community voices now from Pakistan. Even if you see other countries, India, women are making their own leagues in the farming communities, and they're engaging more and more often when it comes to social rights. But I think finance accessibility and inclusive finance is still a question mark when we talk about in context of developing countries. However, as Lisa mentioned, the examples from developed world, even from the Africa region, I think there are so many solutions and examples that can be made part in the South Asia region as well, and in other regions where accessibility to inclusive finance is a question mark. And there's a lot of learning that we can do, and development partners, they can provide technical capacity building support and knowledge transfer to enhance and strengthen this accessibility to inclusive finance. Over to you, Javeria.
Thanks, Zainab. I think you have captured it really well. Lisa, I'll turn to you now in terms of your experience working in other developing countries' context?
Thanks. And I think I'll echo a number of the things that Zainab said. While it's important to respect local culture and customs, promoting inclusive climate finance requires actively challenging norms that exclude women from decision-making and participation. And this can involve identifying specific cultural barriers and finding ways to work around them. It can also mean working with local leaders, religious institutions, male allies to demonstrate the economic and environmental benefit of women's involvement. Navigating the cultural norms around gender when promoting these inclusive investments, I think, requires addressing the specific challenges and barriers that women face in different cultural contexts. And Zainab highlighted some of them in Pakistan. A lot of these stem from deeply ingrained social norms, limited access to financial systems, restricted mobility. But I think there are some strategies that have been helpful. One that is helpful in overcoming some of these patriarchal structures that limit access to finance is through women-led community saving groups. There's one in Nepal that offers small loans specifically for adaptation efforts like flood-resilient ag without requiring land as collateral, which is something women often lack. So that approach can work within the existing community structure, and it also empowers women as financial decision makers in the climate resilient effort, so enhances social standing. In sub-Saharan Africa, Southeast Asia, leveraging informal networks and cooperatives has also been effective, I think, in overcoming some financial exclusion. There are examples of women who are excluded from formal economy jobs who have been incorporated. So like in Nigeria, for example, there are initiatives which collaborate with women in informal recycling networks and help them earn income from waste collection while reducing emissions. A lot of these projects provide training as well as financial literacy, small business operations. So it turns what are often marginalized roles into formal income generating opportunities within the green economy. The other thing is that, sometimes women have traditional roles that can be utilized and leveraged in resource management. In Cambodia, there's a women-led community forestry enterprise that trains women in sustainable forestry practices and organizes them into cooperatives. The other thing it does is provides training at the community level to combat gender-based violence, and that can prevent women from taking leadership roles in forestry, but these trainings create a more welcoming environment for them to do that. And so this allows women to have formal training in some areas where they might face some barriers, but also have opportunities. Another thing is to work with male allies to challenge some of the more restrictive gender norms. There's a sustainable water partnership project in Jordan that collaborates specifically with male religious leaders and has them endorse publicly women's participation in conservation efforts. And so by framing women's contributions as beneficial to the welfare of the community as a whole, the program gains wider acceptance and allows women to take leadership roles in local water resource management without really changing some of their traditional roles. And then I think Zainab made a great point about these digital platforms. It sounds like Pakistan has one that's kicking off. There's in East Africa, there's M-Pesa, which a lot of people are familiar with, which enables women to borrow and save and make payments remotely. There are also digital platforms like M-Kopa Solar, which allows women to purchase solar products through small installments. So that increases financial autonomy, access to renewable energy. So I think that these examples are sort of meant to highlight that promoting gender inclusive climate finance requires tailored solutions that really consider what are the barriers in that cultural context and what are effective ways that make sense in that context to remove them. So that could be gender sensitive finance products, community-based capacity building, or leveraging some of these digital solutions.
Thanks, Lisa and Zainab. I think great examples. And thank you for sharing this with our audience. I was just wondering, in the start of the discussion, we did said that both public and private sector has to play a key role in inclusive climate investment. So my next question to both of you is, how do we get the private sector to see the value of in investing in inclusive climate solutions, especially in regions that are more vulnerable to climate impact? So Lisa, if you can, start your discussion, and then, I'll move to Zainab for more specific Pakistan-based examples.
Sure, and I'm excited to hear Zainab's take on the local perspective. I think to get the private sector to see the value in investing in inclusive climate solutions, especially in vulnerable regions, we should look to strategies that align business incentives with social impact. So blended finance is one approach that is well known, where public and private funds combine to reduce investment risk. And this model, I think, has been effective in areas like renewable energy, where concessional funding de-risk projects and encourages private companies to invest in underserved markets. Another impactful approach is using outcome-based incentives. So GCF's RED Plus program in Indonesia ties funding to measurable outcomes like emissions reductions and local inclusion. So this approach means that companies benefit only when they achieve specific inclusive outcomes, and so it aligns profits and social and environmental impact. I think inclusive procurement standards can also play a big role in terms of, what can government do. So Kenya, for example, they have procurement requirements that prioritize companies that source from women-led cooperatives and sustainable ag. And so this encourages companies like Nestle and others that to focus on inclusive sourcing. So that it opens the doors to local women, but also strengthens supply chains with climate resilient practices. Other things I know we use in the US and they're popping up elsewhere as well. Tax incentives and subsidies can be highly effective. Colombia, for instance, companies there receive tax deductions for investing in sustainable gender inclusive projects. So I think that fiscal policies can create clearer business cases for inclusivity in higher risk regions. Lastly, there are some platforms for sharing of learning and best practices across sectors, and that can help to build momentum so that public-private knowledge sharing can help businesses see where inclusive climate investments are working and how they can replicate that with success. I think when companies see that inclusive investments can reduce risk, open new markets potentially, and create more resilient supply chains, the business case becomes clearer.
Yes, I think taking on the lead from Lisa, I think the examples that you have mentioned, they're very important, especially when we're talking about the bigger giants in the private sector, the multinational corporations. Their role is it is very exclusive. For example, in regions like not just African region, but also when we are talking about South Asia, multinational corporations are playing an important role when we are talking about agriculture communities and women-led agriculture. So that is where the inclusive investment comes into. They also have a potential to play an important role in context of strengthening the diplomacy within the region, especially when we are talking about inclusive climate investment. And if I talk about Pakistan, we have companies like PepsiCo, Nestle, Coca-Cola. They are engaged at community level in strengthening the capacities of the communities, especially women. But multinationals, one of the important components is the D&I component, the diversity inclusion component. It's part of their vision and mission, right? But also now in Pakistan, there's a trend is shifting when we are talking about the very local, its own private sector. Now they're also making sure that they become part of the solutions, and they're ensuring technical capacity buildings. There are different companies who are engaged in the Sindh side and also in Punjab side in empowering women and upskilling them, especially also with their collaborating with the government. Public-private partnerships are being ensured. Even in the Punjab side, we have the Green Development Program. The government decided to solarize the tube wells to, enhance sustainable energy solutions within the agriculture sector. And they're also inviting private sector to take the lead. And private sector is willing to work, and they're providing solutions. Although this has been missing over the last, decades, but this is something that we are now seeing in Pakistan, we are now experiencing in Pakistan, even in other countries, in Bangladesh, there's a lot of trend towards public-private partnerships, and they're supporting their industries, they're supporting their women in agriculture. But I think the multinational companies, they have more investments, they have a larger chunk compared to the local private sector, especially in developing countries. And I think their alignment with the priorities of the government is crucial when we are talking about funds like GCF, like Adaptation Fund, and other funds. So if the private sector is aligned with the government, then I don't think there's any challenge that can hamper the way of accessing the finance. However, even then, technical capacities becomes a question mark, because GCF, if you see the scale of funding that Pakistan has been able to access from GCF, it's very, very negligible. Why? Because we don't even know how to fill the form and access the funding. So in that perspective, one thing that I have been throughout this discussion, I have been focusing is technical capacities. Development partners like USA, development partners like other countries, they can provide the support, and they're all, and especially at communities level, at rural women level, where challenges arise, where we have the solutions. The only thing is how to develop bankable project to access the bigger chunks of the funding. And I think that can change the game when private sector comes into. There are many development partners who are providing opportunities to support private sector, and also to support private sector adaptation for the efforts in adaptation, for the efforts in making finance inclusive in developing countries. So that's where government and private sector can bridge the gap and can make it more accessible for the communities in Pakistan.
Hey, thanks, Zainab. And I think while when you were talking, you also talked about that women has to be part of the solutions, And I think that's close nicely to the next question that I have for Lisa. Lisa, how do we ensure that the climate investments don't just include women as beneficiaries, but actually shift the power dynamics so they are the ones driving the change? Would be really good to see your perspective on this.
Thanks, Javeria. I think there are a number of approaches that can help to ensure that climate investments don't just include women as beneficiaries, but genuinely empower them to drive change. A major one is dedicated funding mechanisms for women-led projects. On CFDA, we've launched the Climate Gender Equity Fund, which was a public-private partnership between USAID and Amazon, which focuses on women-led funds investing in climate resilience and renewable energy. And it's providing financial support to put women at the forefront. At the more grassroots level, I think gender responsive grants and loan programs can help. In Mexico, they offer micro grants to indigenous women-led groups in sustainable forestry and agriculture, which empower women with resources and leadership roles. We've discussed before capacity building and leadership development are also vital. There are a number of initiatives in which women are trained. There's one in Rwanda where women are trained as forest rangers in reforestation, which gives them control over land restoration projects. Some can provide livelihoods. East Africa's Solar Sister Initiative trains women entrepreneurs to sell clean energy products. So it offers skills in sales, finance, leadership, which helps women become community leaders in sustainable energy. We talked before about policy frameworks that enforce or sort of mandate gender parity, whether it's at the national level or through local governance structures that have gender quotas within environmental committees, and that allow women to take active roles in resource management. These networks and platforms for collective action can be very helpful, which allows women to share knowledge and advocate for change. Women's cooperatives in farming can sometimes allow women to pool resources, access training, and push for climate smart practices. Platforms like 2X Global, which not only sort of set criteria for investments, also connect women entrepreneurs and can foster collaboration and peer support for women. Long-term investment, I think, in shifting cultural norms is also important for sustained change to to help women be leaders rather than just beneficiaries. So, I already mentioned the initiative in Jordan. I think in Bangladesh, community climate projects are also shifting social views gradually, but by involving both men and women in water management trainings. And I think demonstrating the economic benefits of women's participation, by doing that, these programs have made it more socially acceptable for women to lead. I think market-driven incentives also encourage corporate partnerships with women-led initiatives, whether it's procurement standards. I know Danone, for instance, has partnered with women-led dairy cooperatives in Senegal, and that provides stable markets and technical support. So I think, these market-driven initiatives where women are leading can really help support the change. Dedicated funding, capacity building, policy support, collective action networks, cultural change, and market incentives, I guess, are the my sort of top line for things that can help transition women from beneficiary roles to really being leaders in climate resilience.
That's fantastic. Thanks, Lisa. Zainab, do you want to add anything before I move to the next question?
Yeah, I think in context of the developing countries perspective, like Pakistan, we are really good on paper when it comes to, especially now over the years, when it comes to developing policies. For example, we have developed under the GCF funding, that's a climate change gender action plan. It was developed 2 years ago, and I think that was a landmark decision by the government to integrate gender within the climate change action planning. Then we also have women parliamentarian caucuses. We also have different, women groups, women climate activist groups. But the problem comes that when we are talking about data. So gender disaggregated data is something that we are lacking at the moment. And no matter how many policies we create, that will create a hurdle. And especially because our policies are about accessing inclusive climate investment. So when data is missing, we are not sure where exactly to put that into, what exactly the project should be, and how exactly are we going to make our communities access that finance. And I think that data is a question mark. However, at governance level, a lot is being done to make it more, gender action planning and policies are being developed. But at local level, because we don't have local governance system that's strengthened like developed countries, so that's why data accessibility becomes question mark. So I think that's a challenge also. But I think over the years we have improved our policy planning and policy policy writing, planning, and developing frameworks. Stakeholder engagement is now becoming very cohesive part of policy planning, and community voices is becoming part of policy planning. Women are taking seats at in the technical sectors like energy sector, like climate finance sector. So I think it will change. It is changing. It will change, and we will see improvement over the years. For example, in the last 5 years, I think the term climate has a lot of it's a buzzword now in Pakistan. Everybody is aware of what's happening. But if we talk about before floods 2022 and even 2 to 3 years back when we experienced heat waves, not many people were able to relate it to the climate phenomena. They thought it's a cycle that comes and goes, so it happens. So that's why now women are at the forefront of every planning that we are doing, every policy that we are making. But I wish we also get good with the implementation framework. And I wish we learn from the countries that Lisa has shared, the best examples from Africa region, from developed countries. There's a lot of good learning that we can do. And I wish we can get that implemented. But although it's happening, but I believe in next 4 to 5 years, we'll also be able to see that shift that's needed at the moment.
Really great discussions and conversation that we are having now, and while I was hearing to both of you, when it comes to climate investment, both of you have given examples about renewable energy, infrastructure project, water and agriculture management. But I'm wondering which one sector or area you think is being overlooked in discussions of inclusive climate finance, especially in the context of developing countries, So it would be great to hear from both of you. Should I ask Zainab for you to go first?
Sure. Thank you. So interestingly, in Pakistan now, we have a lot of women-led startups. And there are so many startups who are focusing around waste management practices and circular economy. But I think this is a sector that's extremely neglected, that's not being prioritized at the moment. And I think a lot can be done. There's a huge potential. We have young women. We have women who are, acting as waste managers, who are doing waste segregation, who are making compost, who are involving in different plastic recycling projects, who are doing great work in this sector. But I think this sector is something that's still not getting the right recognition. And I think there's another problem. It's not just at national level, it's also happening at regional level. Because we are the least integrated region when we are talking about South Asia, especially. In Africa region, I believe there's a lot of, there are many good examples of women startups who are being, financed, at whose solutions are being scaled up. But at South Asia level, this is not happening at the moment. And I think this is something that the region multi-crisis diplomacy within the region can help to cater into. The think tanks, the academia, the networks, the track 3 diplomacy, right? So I think this kind of thing can help us to make it more accessible for these women to scale up their solutions, at least at national level. So yeah, this is one sector that I think is getting neglected at the moment.
Lisa, Zainab talked about waste management. What do you think?
Yeah, I agree that waste management and circular economy initiatives are one opportunity for real triple bottom line investment. Some of the formal waste management systems can be limited, and so a lot of the work is being done by informal workers, and a lot of those workers are women. And so these projects can have massive climate impacts by reducing emissions from waste and encouraging sustainable resource use. And they can also empower women economically if they're incorporated through these investments into these activities. I know in Colombia, there's been a recycling program that partners with female waste pickers and provides them with training and financial support. And also they finance projects that allow safer working conditions to make it easier for women to participate in the sector. I know through our CFDA work, we're also looking at other initiatives in Pakistan and elsewhere around other sectors where women have informal roles. So working with livestock, is women often have informal roles, and there's a lot to be done on methane reduction. So I think I would look to sectors where women are very much part of the value chains and are contributing, but aren't necessarily incorporated, paid, or protected, and looking at how to design investments that address those issues so that you can get both the climate impacts and the inclusion.
Great, Lisa. I think great pick on methane reduction and role of women in that. So the last question to both of you is, if you could wave a magic wand and change one thing about how inclusive climate investments are approached in developing countries, what would it be? So you have 1 minute each.
Yeah, I think I would let Lisa respond first, and then I can go ahead.
Okay, if I had a magic wand, I'd make mandatory for every climate project to have gender responsive budgeting. So that means that every dollar invested has to account for how it impacts men and women. And we've seen how this works in practice. Take the example of climate smart agriculture projects in Kenya, where funding was directed specifically to support women farmers in adopting sustainable practices. The results were really fantastic, and not just in terms of productivity, but in overall economic uplift of these communities. Gender responsive budgeting ensures that we're not just ticking boxes, but actually designing projects that work for everyone. So I guess, I would follow the dollars and think ahead of time and make sure that resources are allocated adequately to ensure inclusion. Over.
So if I could wave a magic wand, I would ensure that in every, especially in Pakistan, in every province, in every, at union level, we have women resilience hubs that make sure that whenever we are hit by climate induced disaster, the special needs of women get addressed, because those special needs, the sanitation needs, are something that are not prioritized when disaster hits us. And I think this is something that's very close to the women living here in Pakistan and to the women living anywhere in South Asia region. The infrastructure gets damaged whenever we are hit by floods, whenever we are hit by hurricanes, and there are no emergency hospitals. The pregnant women, where are they supposed to go and to give birth? There's water everywhere. So I think, and then sometimes young girls are unable to talk about it. Their special needs, there are no toilets accessible for them because there's water everywhere. Who is going to address those issues? So I think this is something that I will do to ensure there are women-led community resilience hubs who make sure that they're providing the women and young girls with every basic need that they require whenever disaster strikes. So yeah, that's my take on that.
Fantastic. So we have heard about gender budgeting and women-led community resilience hubs. Thank you so much, both of you. It was fantastic having you and having this, great chat on inclusive climate investment. And thank you to the audience for hearing us out. Bye-bye.